Good morning, I'm Kevin. I'm part of the technical product marketing team focused around what we used to think of as finance and operations and AX before that, etc. Today, I want to kind of break out a number of aspects for us all to kind of get a sense as to what is now finance and the supply chain management, how it all kind of hangs together from a technologies perspective. And as I go through this content, I've actually embedded quite a lot of material in the actual slides themselves. So as I'm talking, please do be mesmerized by the animations, because my goal really was to try and help express what is the product, what we do with it, how it is used, so you get to see as much of it as possible. Equally, I'm going to jump in and show 3 little demonstrations of the applications as we go through, so you get a bit more of a sense in action as to how it all kind of brings together. So, from a themes perspective, I don't know how many of you have already been through the learning path exercise with us already yesterday and so far this morning, but there's a lot of underpinning that's going on across the whole wider Dynamics 365 in terms of how are these technology trends coming together. And each of us, when we're looking at it from an applications perspective, look at it from a slightly different lens. So from my perspective, I'm coming at it from the modern finance, and I'm thinking about it from the modernization of the supply chain management. So when I'm looking at the trends that are impacting us, because we all know it's continuously changing, which is a great environment to be in, there's aspects that we need to start taking on board rather than thinking about the sort of traditional sort of activities that go on in a finance team's perspective, or perhaps in the warehouse and how our inventory is being managed. And that's where we can start to leverage and take advantage of this digital feedback loop that you would have heard about previously and yesterday during the keynotes. So there's a host of areas, and I can call out a couple. When I'm thinking about a customers list, how do we manage those customers? What is the trends of payments, etc.? We can start to leverage the wider technologies that are there to try and be predictive about when they may well pay, how we might manage their credit limits, etc. And from a supply chain perspective, we've also got those considerations about how do we bring together the wider connected factory to have an impact on our production. So there's a host there of areas that we can focus in on. But when we think about it from underpinning and what our activities are today, where Microsoft is concerned, it really comes down to these 3 areas. And that's what I'm going to try and articulate as we go through. I'm going to start with the technology modernization and express some of the component parts that are there. Then I'll think about the modern finance and the impacts that we have there. And then ending on operational innovations of how we are bringing together some of those kind of capabilities that we have. The digital feedback loop is really key to any application, but I think it's really important when you think about it from a traditional ERP sense. There is so much data out there that we need to leverage, that we can really take advantage of. And when I kind of bring that together in terms of the wider spectrum, how we can help with our business cloud and interact with any area across the portfolio. For instance, yesterday I was highlighting in the demonstration how a sales associate could be using Dynamics 365 Sales to then create a customer that is then managed in the finance team to uplift and work out what the rules would be applied to their credit limit or their loyalty card, and back again. All of that data kind of comes together, and we have this kind of common data service and the ability called dual rights now that enable us to move data around very effectively. So I'm focusing predominantly on 2 aspects, which is the finance and the supply chain on the right-hand side. So if we go down the layer and think about the technology, there's a structure to how we like to try and articulate this now. And there's a architecture that kind of brings a number of areas together for us. And this is, in effect, the underpinning element that's appropriate for my finance and my supply chain aspects, where we've got capabilities around the automation that we can leverage, and I'll focus a bit more on that in a moment. We've got how we need to interact with a host of aspects, whether it be other applications or simply taking a statement down from our banks to do a bank reconciliation. The breadth is quite diverse. So if I focus in on one key pillar for a moment, This is an area called lifecycle services, and this is how we are in effect managing the deployments, whether it be in the cloud or on-premise for finance and supply chain management. And its strength lies in the fact that it is managing the environments, it is managing any support tickets, it's managing how you are actually working as a project. So there's an implementation methodology that you can apply. It will steer you through the individual processes of that implementation methodology. Not just you as perhaps as a customer or as a partner, but also Microsoft as well. We all three of us can be working together in the same project to help kind of deploy, manage, and whether it be your actual production environment or any sandbox environments that you may well have, they're all accessible through that particular environment that underpins. And then when we think about it from the intelligence perspective, and I'll highlight a number of areas around this shortly, Power BI is key. How we leverage information is key. We've got this wider business cloud that we can take advantage of. We've got this common data service. So now we need to really kind of push through to that next level. And so what we tend to do, and I'll highlight a few of the capabilities here in a moment, is when you're looking at any of your tables or your fields within your tables or your entities, however you like to think of these things, you can reflect that directly in the context of a person that is using the business application. And you can control that content as well. Because that data is also coming across not just in terms of that transactional perspective, but you've also got a lot of other information that you can bring together that is relevant as well. So to take full advantage of it is really key now. So Power BI is embedded directly within finance and supply chain management, or you can use powerbi.com and interact directly. But at the same time, the Power Platform kind of sits with us now. And so we can start to interact and kind of automate a host of activities. Up until yesterday, you would have heard of Microsoft Flow. It's now Process Automate. But that's a key area for us in a number of areas, such as workflow or triggering of business events. Because there is a business events catalog within the applications that can be used to instigate a process, whether it be a transaction workflow to approve a purchase order or a purchase requisition, or whether it is to actually drive an action off the back of something happening, whether a customer goes over their credit limit, or you've had a notification from a machine on the shop floor to trigger a maintenance request. So that technology is there for us now to leverage and really help, and it's not overly complicated, and the citizen developer level can take full advantage of these. It's a browser-based set of applications, but equally there's always going to be opportunities and needs around kind of simplifying the experience even further, or making information available wherever we are, whether we be perhaps on the golf course or working on our shop floor. The scope is there for a mobile application to be used, and it can often be used in the right sort of context. And there are actually 3 levels or 3 approaches that you have to create a mobile app directly for finance and the supply chain management. There's a native client that you can in effect build up the content. If it was a sales order, you can identify against the screen what content you'd need to be in the mobile app for a sales order review perhaps. There's the Power App capability where you can leverage the content through the CDS or directly to the SQL tables. And then if you really need to go further, because your experience needs to go to that level of interaction, whether it be something perhaps really high volume, whether it be something that you want to kind of really structure content in a particular way, then you can go and create your own further comprehensive mobile apps as well on top. So there's quite a platform of choice here in terms of how we can kind of bring contents together. I've mentioned a couple of times around this common data service, and it kind of gets used in a number of different ways. But at the same time, there's also a data management suite or data management capability that we have to consider. How do we kind of bring data into the applications? How do we perhaps push data out? And there's a host of areas around, or examples, sorry, like a bank statement or payroll or something that we're taking from a vendor's product catalog. There's the diversity of connections that are needed is quite astounding sometimes, which is great. But we should try to help by unifying and bringing those tools together. And the animation that you've just seen on screen is a great example of where we are taking the entity breakdown that's inside our application and perhaps mapping that across to a particular set of fields in a file that you may have got from a bank or catalog. So that's quite a diverse mix of underlying platform capabilities there. And what I want to do is just kind of switch across and give you a little bit of an example of how the user experience is brought together. Now, this is the default client that we have. This is what most people will see. There are a few variations for administrators, for self-service, but this is the primary view that we will have. And it's broken into a number of ways that we can use it. The boxes that you see on screen at the moment are workspaces. These are workspaces that are appropriate to perhaps me as a role. And if you've come from earlier versions of AX, because I was chatting to one chap earlier, this would be like the equivalent of Role Center, but gone a little bit further. You can control what you see, what you use inside this. But it's also trying to be a little bit informative. So in the middle of my screen, I've got the credit and collections for customers shown. And I've put a few of my lists on the screen as well, so I've got that kind of KPI information immediately available before I've even gone anywhere further. And to navigate around is pretty straightforward. You've got a few opportunities on the left here to kind of pin things that are your favorites that you're always going to be coming back to. So in my case, I've got a few items on here that I was using yesterday. I've got my recent list of activities that I've been through in the application. So again, trying to help speed us along, keep us productive as possible. But then there's also these individual workspaces, and I think it's about 50, 55 that we provide out of the box, and you can go and create your own as well. And if that's something that you need, great. It's just a right-click, add a new workspace. But the other thing I want to just highlight is the breadth of what this application is capable of. And I'm just really just scrolling down the left-hand menus to highlight the modules that are available, because it is very broad, and I'm only really scratching a surface when I highlight a few areas here. So from accounts payable, we have asset management to cost management, all the way down through to production control, warehouse management and transportation. So there's quite a breadth of individual workloads that people can take advantage of. There's a structure as well to everything that's undertaken. So for instance, if I click on the accounts receivable, my initial list is broken down so that I've got my workspaces, then my core records, then my transaction types, then I go into inquiries and reporting, and then I've got set up. So there's always a kind of a fluid structure in that sense. And if I just expand that out for a moment, you get the sense of the breadth of opportunities for configuration and structure that could be applied to a customer list for customer groupings or price lists, etc. But from a platform perspective as well, I was highlighting earlier around the Power BI capabilities that are here as well. And the customer credit collections actually is a very good example of this. This is a workspace that is structured to help in terms of a credit controller, continuously kind of checking particular accounts. So I've got these little tiles on the left-hand side here that kind of define my activities that I perhaps need to focus in on. So I've got, in my case, 12 open activities. And on the right-hand side here, if I just scroll across, I've got my customers overdue, my age balanced list of customers, and I've got a host of content and material that's kind of being built up for us as we go. And then we can structure the activities for credit control and how we manage the chasing for monies and so on. That's all available for us in this kind of application. But key really from a technology perspective is what I wanted to highlight is that we've got this Power BI that's directly embedded within. Now in my case, I'm actually using the newer option for the Azure data storage capabilities, the second generation. So I'm actually pushing my data out to that platform, and I'm then referencing that content here as well. So within my application, I have my Power BI, and my Power BI is now directly available for me to do whatever I need. And across the bottom, you've got the usual sort of Power BI tabs, and I have filters on the right-hand side as well. the running of the report itself is not so much what I want to highlight, it's what I have in terms of the platform and the capability here. So we provide quite a library of workspaces, quite a library of Power BI dashboards and reports automatically. Now, it's going to be a case that not always are they appropriate for your needs. You know, some are going to be close. A lot of times you'll be looking to create content that fits how you as an organization need to be reporting. And that's great, because you can go up and you can now go and select from a list from your own individual Power BI workspace, and then replace whatever Microsoft has provided with your own report or dashboard. But equally, if you have the privileges within the application, you could also be manipulating the layout, the visualizations of the content directly within the application as well, without having to kind of dive across and explore through powerbi.com or via the Power BI desktop app. And in my case here, I've just clicked on the edit, and I've got now my visualizations, my fields, got all my filters, etc., that I could be using directly available to me, as if I'd been creating this within Power BI. And of course, if I don't like anything on here, I can just go through the motions of changing and saving back and replacing. So as a platform, it makes it a lot easier than having to go off and create each time. So just switching back a gear. So I want to come up a layer from highlighting some of the capabilities around the platform itself and what we're using and how we could be using them. And I come up to the finance side. Now, from a finance perspective, this is a typical sort of journey map of every finance function out there. Whether you have customers or vendors, doesn't really matter. This is a typical sort of flow you're going to have. You're going to be going through the motions of managing those customers. You're going to be managing their terms, transacting with them, sending them letters, sending them statements. There's a whole flow there. And historically, these activities were quite isolated, quite individual, team-orientated activities. Well, there's what I've called there the digital hotspots. There's a host of areas where we can help automate or improve those traditional sort of functions. Whether it would be how we produce our invoices. You know, do we need to do a printed invoice run all the time? Can we electronically produce invoices instead? Can we provide access to vendors to update their records, to manage any bids that have gone out to them, or check where the payment is from yourselves to that particular vendor? You can provide that sort of level of activity. And then there's areas such as the reconciliation, how we bring data in, how we manage that, how we might automate it. So there's a host of areas where we can help improve. Because when we think about the finance capability and what it kind of really comes down to, there's a lot of content here of areas that may be appropriate to some and not others. Whether it be in the relation to how we might manage our payment and terms, through to how we might manage our individual invoicing. The diagram here is just trying to highlight key areas, but at the same time we've got those kind of vertical lines as well. And these are capabilities that span every functional area, such as reporting and business intelligence or budgeting. I felt it important to kind of just bring to the table that there is, you know, a host of certifications, a host of accreditations that the applications have to go through on quite a regular basis. This application suite is used globally. It is in a lot of our data centers across the globe. But we also have to kind of recognize not just the security, but the compliance to local accounting standards, etc. So when I think about it from a regulatory perspective, there are times when there is a need in a particular vertical market space that's going to go beyond what we're going to be providing out of the box. There is through the lifecycle services, there's a localization tile or portal where you can see all the activity, all the requests, everything that we've kind of got going on all the time. And there is an ISV community as well that has, sometimes additional capabilities that go beyond what we've provided to cover a particular market or a particular country that isn't covered by Microsoft. But there is also the scope for you to kind of manage this yourselves as well. It's not a case of replacing what we're providing, it's a case of complementing what is available. So there is a globalization engine that you can take advantage of. Then there are kind of key areas of focus for us at the moment. So yes, the technology and the platform is important, but there's also some kind of functional capabilities that are shifting for us all the time. And I've just highlighted one at the moment called revenue recognition, which is something that we've been putting a lot of energy into. And this is great for those sort of organizations that need to be starting to think about subscriptions, service contracts. How do you account for those sort of areas effectively, rather than doing these as manual activities as we would have done historically? So revenue recognition is just an area I'm calling out because it's affecting us more and more so now. We've all got our own individual subscriptions as people, and that's becoming very true from a business standpoint as well. But we also have to kind of go also into another sort of direction and level as well. There's a lot of feedback that comes through, and we take that feedback on, and we keep improving the capabilities that we all need within the finance function, and how we are managing our credits scoring system for our individual customers. Well, that capability continues to shift and evolve, and you'll see some more about that information as the next few months evolve. But this is where we can start to kind of assessing our customers that we have. What sort of risk will they have? Can we score them in terms of a risk? You can build up a rules engine to define that sort of capability. So, switching back to the application for a brief moment. What I want to just highlight here is a bit of the breadth of the functions that we have. So, and then also then thinking of it from a platform perspective as well. I've just gone into one of the workspaces, which is a workspace really dedicated to helping a finance manager manage their team and monitor how they are kind of closing off that regular activity they need to do in terms of period closure. Now, what's key here is this whole application isn't about just a single legal entity. It's about being able to manage multiple legal entities in many countries. And this is what my list is in effect starting to show me immediately, is that across my individual companies, I can see the rough sort of progress that's being made. I can then start to focus in on particular areas like accounts receivable or a particular team member that I may need to. But if I wanted to kind of see the all-up tasks, I can just click through a particular tile and see all the tasks that need to be done. So as a finance manager, I can start to see immediately the column that's in the red, overdue. They're going to be seriously overdue, I'm sure. Oh, it's not too bad. And then on top of that, we've also got the capability of kind of chasing individuals and saying, well, why haven't you done that currency revaluation? Why haven't you generated that list of statements? And if there isn't really a viable reason, there's also the opportunity to kind of click on something and click through to do that particular task as well. And so not just the finance manager, but the finance team might use this as a way of helping and driving that productivity and dealing with all those sort of tasks that we have to manage on a day-to-day basis to close off that finance period. But the other reason I wanted to highlight this area for us is that there's a host of kind of individual sort of capabilities that we've got going on here as well. So at the moment, I've got this particular view that's showing me everything, and this is our kind of classic view. If I wanted to, I could go through the motions of hiding individual companies. I'm just picking some columns at random. As I'm hiding these away, I could then go away and save that view and keep that for myself. So I'm in effect kind of starting to personalize the user experience rather than what the application can present to us immediately all the time. And when I think about it from perhaps a transaction lines perspective, there is a host of information on there all the time. There's fields of information that are relevant to pretty much every industry. And we perhaps don't need to see all that information. So following the same pattern of what I'm just doing here, we can close down the list of fields shown to an individual very, very simply without having to create traditional sort of custom forms. So I'm going to switch gear again a little bit and think about the perspective of the supply chain management. And from this perspective, there is a typical sort of journey map that goes with this. And this again, there's a whole host of aspects where there isn't that sort of traditional interaction going on. There isn't that, we can be taking that delivery note that's come inbound, how we might record it. It might be paper-based. We might not be doing anything in terms of improving the efficiency of that, or how we might be structuring our warehouse in terms of the racks and the rows and columns, etc. But when we actually then kind of step back and think about, well, how can a business cloud start to help, then we've again got a host of digital hotspots as to how we can start to help across the board, whether it be managing those inbound or outbound logistics that we have. When we have that delivery note that comes in, how do we record that? Is it paperwork? Is it scanned? Is it recognized? Is it dealt with from a barcode? Those sort of areas can all be taken advantage of. How do we kind of do cyclic counting of our stock? How do we propose what lists? Is it a case that we always produce a document that gets used on the shop floor, or do we use a mobile app that simplifies that experience? The host of examples out there are quite diverse. And what we're starting to see is a lot of activity around that kind of bringing all the manufacturing flow together and thinking of it more as a connected solution, a connected factory, a connected production, a connected distribution. And so there's areas here that we've been investing in and exploring quite effectively with a host of customers. And if I switch across to the architecture perspective for a moment, you start to see functional areas being brought to our attention. There's quite a diverse mix again here. How we might be managing our inventory, how we might be managing our RFQs, how we might be looking at quality control. These are all kind of capabilities that are core within that we have to look at how we manage. And what's also kind of key actually is across the top. How do we interact with, whether it be our customers, our suppliers, our production equipment? Because it is this kind of connected world now, and we're starting to see more activity around the interactions with IoT data on machinery, on a shop floor. If I kind of start thinking a little bit further, there's quite a breadth of kind of aspects here to kind of take into account. So when I'm thinking inventory, when I'm thinking production, I'm not thinking necessarily the production of just a chair. It could be, how we mix orange juice and how we record those sort of units of measure for orange juice or a chair, which we could be buying and selling as a distributor, or we could be manufacturing. And those sort of activities all kind of need this kind of inbound, outbound activity for that inventory level of management. The units of measure, how many do we sell, what mix. So where it might be a mix for orange juice, it could be a bill of materials for a chair, or whatever the example may well be. And then when I think about it from procurement, there's a host of capabilities here that's worth just bringing to the fore. I tend to always mentally think of it as a kind of a sequence of events that are occurring. The very beginning being appointing a vendor, appointing a supplier. Then you're defining the terms, how you're going to be trading with them, or you might go out and source bids for a project, or you might be sourcing a price for some materials for production. And then it's how do we then start to interact with that supplier or that vendor as such. And there's a host of capabilities in here from how we manage the individual terms, trading terms, how we provide them access directly in as a portal area. And then another area that's kind of thinking at a level below that is an asset management capability. So when we're thinking about high value items that we need to manage, we're not looking at it from the finance perspective so much now. We're looking at it more from the perspective of, and when I meant finance, I was thinking depreciation and that sort of area. I'm thinking now, what do we do in terms of managing a machine that we are relying on, whether it be a forklift truck through to a process line? We need to manage that complete life cycle. And this is where we can start helping by being proactive, being effective with our preventative maintenance planning on how we might manage that forklift truck. And I'll show you a little demonstration of this area and just kind of draw out some of those sort of capabilities that are there. And then there's something called IoT intelligence. Now this kind of is quite a big area for us at the moment. There's a lot of activity going on around how we help connect business resources to a machine, so that when a machine perhaps stops producing, or there's an issue in terms of a measurement around the quality of a product being produced, or whether there's just a delay. You know, there's a number of different individual sort of scenarios that we are providing now. And we in effect provide a simplified wizard approach that takes an installer through the motions of connecting the IoT notification that's come via a local IoT hub or IoT central, connecting that up to a business resource such as a mixing line or a forklift truck, whatever it might be. But we also kind of have to consider the fact that it's not just the production supervisors that can benefit from this sort of information. It's also the local machine operator. And where my screen is in effect landed is on the view that a machine operator would see. And where they've got a little bit of time series information coming through which they can zoom in and explore a little bit further. But this is actually in red highlighting the fact that immediately something is wrong. When we set up that notification process, we're actually setting up a period of time that enables that local machine operator to, in effect, clear a blockage, reset the machine, restart it in whatever form is necessary. Then they can dismiss before it needs to get escalated up into the wider production. And then this kind of works very effectively in the context of, okay, from a production supervisor who's managing the planning of everything that is going through production. If there is something wrong, they can be notified straight away. They can then start the rerouting process. Now, historically, this would have taken an overnight activity known as master planning that would have been run quite an intense process. Now, because we can use this kind of wider business cloud, we can leverage something called planning optimization, which kind of turns those activities that were very heavy processes into something that can take a few minutes. So suddenly this IoT intelligence with this planning optimization kind of speeds that whole sort of activity up and gets that production facility up and running a lot quicker. So if I just give you a little sense of some of this. So, yeah. What I want to do is just focus in a little bit initially around this asset management capability and just give you a sense of some of the overlapping areas that we have here. So first off, you know, when we think of an asset, we can be thinking of, well, where is it based? What type of asset is it? And there's an asset view that kind of enables us to break this information down into an appropriate structure that we might need for perhaps a reporting perspective. And so in my case, I'm grouping together my forklifts, I'm grouping together my utilities, and I've got my machinery for finished goods in one grouping. So I can structure my analysis accordingly. And then on the right-hand side here, I've got a host of kind of core information that you'd expect. And if I click through to my forklift truck in this particular instance, just without even going down into the detail that you can see there, there's quite a breadth of information being retained for, in my case, a forklift truck. Who provided it? Where does it sit in terms of our fixed asset register? Kind of key areas that we always need to kind of have access to and explore. But there's also the kind of the proactive perspective in terms of how do we relate a forklift truck to a maintenance plan? How frequently do we need to perform maintenance on it? And we can define those sort of areas. But there's a couple of areas that are also worthy of mentioning as well, because in order to kind of really learn and not just set, say, a maintenance plan that every, 6 months we check the oil on a forklift truck, we actually could be putting in some counters. And you can define these up in all sorts of different ways. But a counter is a great way of measuring how much is a piece of equipment being used. In my case, I'm just focusing on a forklift truck, but it could be anything that we're measuring against any sort of unit of measure that you can define. So it could be, in my case, I think I'm doing how many hours of usage, but it could be how many miles I'm driving this forklift truck, or it could be how many units are being produced on a production line, or how the temperature range might be being managed. And what this is in effect doing is then building up a history. So as we start to go through that process of, in effect, tracking what is being, how a machinery is being used, at the same time, we could be thinking about the wider business cloud perspective and capabilities like the IoT intelligence, where we're getting the notifications that could be driving through a maintenance request directly. And if I bring up my list of maintenance requests a moment, immediately I'm kind of back into a particular workspace that just highlights in a very, very similar format to what you saw earlier with the credit collections workspace. I've got my summary tiles on the left-hand side, and then going into my list and filters. But I've got a host of data that's starting to be built up here. And my example here at the top has got an IoT notification that's come from a machine directly. But it could also be coming from, the local machine operators notice the sound isn't quite right when it's bashing something into shape. So they could be raising up maintenance requests, being proactive, because there's very likely a maintenance team that is being used in support of an organization. So as we're getting all this sort of insight together, we can start to be proactive in terms of how we might drive out those sort of insights that could be occurring. And what I thought I'd do is I'd just highlight it from a perspective of PowerBI.com for a moment. So this is a report, a dashboard in Power BI that's starting to kind of give me an indicator as to how our machinery is being used. But the key thing is it's starting to give me that insight as to what I perhaps need to focus my attentions on. And that's the kind of did you know aspect in the bottom right-hand corner. It's starting to push information to me. Now, although my sample isn't huge, it is starting to highlight that there is a key dependency on Pilar. Predominantly, we're getting a lot of hydraulic issues. So that insight can drive change where we can be proactive. It might be to cross-train other people, so we take that key person dependency away, or we bring in new individuals, or it might be that we need to up our maintenance plans for the hydraulics on particular equipment so that that doesn't continue to be flagged to us that it's going to be the highest risk area. And from a platform's perspective, I've kind of highlighted this from as if I was in Power BI, because I wanted to just kind of share with you that what I'm looking at here can be, it's kind of timed out, but that would have looked exactly the same inside finance and operations as well, whether it be from the finance or the supply chain. So if I start to kind of bring all this back together for a moment, you know, we started looking at it from the operational innovations perspective of where I've just shown you some asset management capabilities, and I was highlighting some examples around the IoT intelligence. And then we were thinking about it from the perspective of the finance capabilities and some of the areas that overlap there. And the reason I've kind of done this slide side by side is just to give you that feeling and awareness that there's a commonality here of approach and structure, both of which are really underpinned by this technology modernization area of how we manage a project through the lifecycle services, how we manage that user experience, how we might deal with the automations, whether it be through a logic app or through a chatbot. The diversity of how you can be leveraging a platform is built in around us all. So I've got 2 or so minutes left. Thank you for listening. If there's any questions, I think there are mics around. Yeah, I can see mics, so if you want to fire a question at me, more than happy to answer. There's a couple of minutes if you'd like to use them for that. Or you can have 2 minutes back of your life. No pressure. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been great to present to you all. Thanks.